All right, I just tied that halfback nymph and just kind of had an idea for a rubber leg version. So I'm going to tie you one of those too, just while I've got this stuff out. And these videos probably won't come out concurrently, so you'll have to just imagine that they did. But what I've got in the vise here is a Tiemco 5262. This is a size 6, and I've got some 030 lead wire. And I'm going to start wrapping this just like on a regular halfback, about at the hook point. And I'm going to come forward to about 3 or 4 eye lengths behind the hook eye and break that end off. If I can get a hold of him. There we go. And I'll break this back end off as well. I'm going to come in with some 6/0 unithread. Shove those lead wraps nice and tight together. And I'll start this thread just behind the eye. And I'm going to wrap up onto the lead and all the way back to the bend, and then I'll trim that tag end out. And then just cross hatch back and forth over that lead a couple of times. Now the tail is going to be peacock or pheasant tail, regular ringneck pheasant tail feathers. So I'm going to take a clump. We've got a big fly here, so I'm going to take about 40 of these. And I'm roughly guesstimating that. It might be 30. But I want to pull them out so that their tips become even. And I'll pull that clump off. Measure that about a half shank long. And tie that in back there at the bend. Then I'm going to wrap forward over those butt ends. In this case, just short of the end of the lead. And I'll bring my thread back to, just in front of the hook point there. And I'll grab another clump of pheasant tail fibers, about the same size as what I used for the tail. I'm going to tie this clump in on top, but I kind of like to leave this in a sheet so that when I catch it on top, it lays flat. And I just pull it down to length, and then I want to anchor it down in place all the way back to the base of the tail there, so it's kind of a flat piece on top. That's going to become our shellback. Now, on the other halfback, I showed you to tie the feather in by the butt end. When I've tied kind of my own versions of this, I generally tie the feather in by the tip end. And what we want to do here is I'm going to use, this is a saddle feather from a Rooster saddle. This is a Hebert Minor saddle. And I'm going to create a separation point up here, like so. And I'm going to tie that feather in by that tip and wrap back over it to the base of the tail. So I've got that feather tied in by its tip end. And you can see I've splayed some of those initial fibers there at the bend out a bit, just so that they don't get tied down. So now I'm going to come in with some Peacock Herl. And I want a nice healthy bunch here. And I'll trim the tips of those all square and even. I'm going to tie these in maybe just a little further back. I'm going to make the thorax on this one just a little longer. And then come in and put a shot of head cement over all that tie down just to lock things down there. I'm going to pick up my Peacock Herl, and I'm going to start to wrap, kind of traveling forward here, just up to where my thread's hanging. Oh, I'm actually going to back that up just a little bit. I'm going to say 70-30 is probably where I'm at there. And I'll trim those butt ends out. Then I'm going to spiral wrap my thread back down through the body. Make sure you don't catch it at your hackle. And then forward again. And that just toughens that peacock up. It hardly shows. If you look real close, you can see it. But most people won't look that close. And only you and I know. So now to wrap this hackle, we want to fold this a little bit back here at the bend, but tying it in by the tip, we'll sweep these feathers, or these fibers, so that they sweep toward the bend of the hook. And I'm just going to go 3 or 4 evenly spaced turns, a little more sparse than we did on the original halfback. Tie that off with a few turns, and then trim that feather out. Save the rest of that because we'll use that for the thorax. Now I'm going to pick up my pheasant tail fibers back here, and again I want to rock those back and forth a bit. I've got a couple that are sticking at a weird angle back there, so I'll just flatten those down, get rid of them. And I want to pull that shell back over so it encompasses the top half of the hook. When I get it there, I'll anchor that down in place and make sure it's centered. and then I'll wrap over those buttons to just short of the index point. Now the whole idea of showing this one is we're going to throw a couple of rubber legs on there. So I'm going to take a piece of brown flexifloss here, and I'm going to bring my thread back to the front edge of the abdomen, and I'm going to tie this in on my near side right at the juncture there, and I'll leave them about a shank length long for right now. And then I'll catch the other half on the far side along the side of the hook so that we've got a couple of dangly legs hanging out there. Now I'm going to pick up what's left of my feather, and you can see this one's, well, he's a little beat up, but I think I can make him work. I'm going to create another separation point here. I'm going to use the other half of this feather. We'll create a new separation point. Like so. To get these fibers to stand up, if you get a hold of the feather just right, you can kind of get them all swept back against the grain without creasing too many of them. Like so. But I'm going to get that separation point lined up, and I'll tie that in just right in between where we set those legs in. Now we're going to have a wrap of Peacock Herl in there to kind of separate things. Trim our loose ends out. Got kind of a sloppy tie in there, but nothing a nice pair of scissors won't cure. There we go. Like so. So that feather is tied in with the inside of the feather toward the hook shank. So now I'm going to pick up a few more strands of Peacock Herl. I want to kind of get the tips relatively even here. And then cut those so that they're all square. Now I'm going to tie these in. I'll just sweep these legs back out of the way. I'll tie these in up here just behind the hook eye and wrap over them just to the front of those legs. You can see how you can just sweep things back. That's one of the things with rubber legs, is they're always in the way. That's just something you kind of got to get used to. All right, now I'm going to take my Peacock Herl and I'm actually going to wrap backwards between these legs. If I can get a hold of all of them. Here we go. So I'm going to take a turn between the legs. Then I'm going to pull the near leg back and make a turn, and the far leg back and make a turn. And you can see how that just continues to separate the legs. And I'll just slide them back out of the way as I build the thorax, and I'll tie that off just behind the index point. You can see with those legs, if you've got them short enough, you can just sort of push them out of the way with your thread as you tie. We'll get those positioned right where we want them. I'll pick up my hackle feather, and I like to wet my fingers when I do this, but I want to fold just that first turn there at the bottom. Once you get this feather sort of set on edge, it'll stand up the way you want it. And I'll get a couple turns there between the legs, and you can kind of fold as you go. You can see I trapped a few fibers there. Just pull those out. I'll show you a little trick with your whip finisher to do that as well. Slide that set of legs back, kind of fold everything back as you go. And tie that feather off just up here behind the eye. We'll trim that center stem, sweep everything back and clean the head up a bit with a few turns of thread. And we'll come in and whip finish just behind the hook eye. Now if you've got a Mattarelli style whip finisher, and it could be a real Mattarelli, or what I'm using here is the Tiemco midge whip finisher. While I'm doing this, I'm going to trim these legs to about 2/3 of a shank length long, front and back. You can lay these back and do that the same way. So we've got those widespread legs. But can you see right in here, we've got a few hackle fibers that were caught. That hook on that hackle, or on that whip finisher, works perfectly for grabbing anything that's caught in there, and it's a tool that you got sitting handy on your desk. So it makes that job pretty easy. Can you see here? Let's see. See how my far legs are curved in toward the body, and the near legs on my side are curved away. To turn that ankle, see how we can pull these? That's under several wraps of thread, but if I grab this leg and roll it and give it a pull, I can rotate it. So now those legs are facing out. Line everything up. I think we're still good for length. Get that little guy out of there. And there's your Rubberleg Halfback. A little bit more modern version of that old critter. I like the look of that. Honestly, I just came up with that idea and was sort of spitballing. So that's the first one of those I've ever tied. But I've put rubber legs on a lot of things, and I've tied a lot of halfbacks. So you can see how building that toolbox of techniques that you learn along the way can come in handy. And that's how you come up with, if not new patterns, at least variations on patterns. So there you go. There's a little something old, little something new. Probably even borrowed something. So we're halfway there. I'm Charlie Craven. Thanks for watching.